Entwined is a podcast about how so much of the world around us is wound or twisted together. This podcast strives to bear unexposed or indiscernible connections using historical and anecdotal sources. I am P.S. McKay, and along with Elliot Gladstone, this is Entwined. Before we begin, a few things to discuss. If you like the show, take a moment to rate us really quickly on iTunes. More high rankings allow us more exposure, and more exposure brings you more material. Secondly, if you want to do more than just rate the show, please visit our Patreon page where you can become a member and donate some money to the production that technically makes you a producer for the show. And who wouldn't want that title? We offer several free benefits, such as an extra behind-the-scenes fireside chat between myself and Elliot, and a PDF of the transcripts of the shows as they air. So take a look at patreon.com/entwinedpodcast and look into becoming a member of the team. And stay twined. I got an opportunity to see Neil Diamond the other day. Now, I am several demographics below the Neil Diamond target. I know that, and I am not ashamed of that. The experience at the concert was interesting. Now, I'm in my mid-30s, as is my wife, and I can honestly say that I think we were some of the youngest people there that went on their own. The sea of gray hair and bald heads that sat before us only reinforced that perception. But when Neil came out, his voice was still there. He's about 70 now. The human body isn't meant to last much longer than that, but the voice, that golden tone, when he went up into I'm a Believer, that was classic Neil Diamond. Sure, his joints may not be what they used to be, as he tried jiving with his full brass band behind him, but his look and his voice were timeless. I take a certain pride in recognizing more songs than my wife. I know he's not a mainstream for all generations now, but in New England he has of course earned certain immortality by having his song played by the Boston Red Sox during the 7th inning stretch. And maybe that's why he sticks into my psyche so much. Or maybe he's just that good with his talent. I may not have had perfect parents, most of us haven't, but the big legacy that my parents left with me was a taste of music. This was, of course, influenced to me through the most common of all transports, the car. My parents played their music, and I mean their music, almost all the time. That is music from their high school years in the 60s and 70s. Sure, I had an opportunity to hear the synth of the 80s, but with a few exceptions, like Top Gun, it always felt somewhat hollow to me. I needed the full band. I needed the true guitar solo and the saxophone rant. There was something that always felt so soulful and genuine in those songs. And Neil Diamond apparently was the father of half of all the songs in those times anyway. He was such a prolific writer. When I first became a parent, after the fuss of learning how to install the car seats, knowing that the crib I personally put together was not going to collapse, and realized that this small human being was going to be okay under my supervision, I realized I needed to get the tone right. And I had immediately started playing songs from my high school era. Green Day, Sonic Youth, the Gin Blossoms, Hootie, the Bare Naked Ladies, Dimitri, but also eras before me. Conway Twitty, Van Morrison, Sinatra, Diamond, Jimmy Buffett, etc. I fear that in the kind of pick-and-choose world we live in, those artists, that kind of influence is of limited lifespan now. The radio holds a lesser influence on our lives, MTV much less so. The fact that you're hearing this is just a further example of that. And I worry for my children's musical taste because of it. The first CD I ever bought was Made in the USA by the Beach Boys. It was a best-of album. I saw the movie The Navigator, and the scene where they're rocking out to I Get Around was awesome, and as a fanatic 5-year-old, I needed to have it. It was a blizzardy day when my father took me to a Target to get the CD. I remember it was so cold, but I held that CD case in my hand on the way home, looking at the faceless lips with the tongue sticking out, and the pictures of middle-aged men jamming in the ocean. A nice contrast to the whiteout conditions outside my window as we drove slowly home. I would later be mercilessly made fun of for liking that band as I grew older. I was supposed to love New Kids on the Block or U2 or Wu-Tang, and while those are great bands, I couldn't get into them. They didn't have the old school harmony, the genuine artistic soul at the time that I appreciated. It's ironic I live in California now. The first CD I ever owned was a foreshadowing of my future life. And through all the teasing, all the name-calling, they still remained my band. An old saying comes to mind as I think about those merciless days. I'm made of rubber, you're made of glue. What bounces off me sticks onto you. What a hollow and desperate thing to try to say. That saying is to insulate you, to try and desperately take an offensive and turn it around. And why does it reference such a substance? Well, because it's such a wonderful and useful one. If, however, in such a lame attempt to a comeback. It's funny. Rubber is an American invention. And I don't mean the United States American, I mean Western America. Long before the Spaniards came, the Mesoamericans had discovered the sap of the rubber tree in the mysterious Amazon that they called home. It was used for limited purposes, most notably, they were the first to be able to cure it into a soft but solid rubber ball and use it in Mesoamerican ball games. It's a version of volleyball with two parties on each side with varying stakes. In different time frames, it would fit the context for human sacrifice or deep ceremonies. In most, it was just for fun, with different arenas being discovered as far south as Peru and Chile and as far north as Arizona. While the ball was made of rubber, anyone who has had a racquetball thrown at them knows that it is in no way soft. Players would walk away with severe bruising on their bodies and most commonly broken bones. Death was an all too common situation in the game given the size of the ball and the velocity it was hit at. One can only wonder what the Spaniards thought when they first saw such a sport, and how the new material captured their imaginations. The tough part was that rubber is collected like a sap and cured. It could be used in the form of glue in most circumstances and was useful for its elasticity. But it wasn't until the mid-1800s when Charles Goodyear, him, figured out the vulcanization process for rubber and allowed it to be very resistant and durable. It was the perfect process for new tires. And the tires as we know them now are not what they used to be, no. They would be solid pieces of rubber at first on coaches and the Stanley steamer cars. But it was rubber that allowed for the creation of a faster vehicle such as cars to be able to survive on the roads. Without that tree, the world as we know it would be very different. Perhaps much more rail-centric. And while it was American Goodyear who figured out the vulcanization process and started one of the world's largest tire-producing companies in the same city as 5 other companies, it was the British that held a strict monopoly on rubber supplies. Now, Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Company, of course, was an ambitious man. But he was a man with other better visions for the country. In the 1920s, seeking to usurp the British monopoly on rubber, he sought a deal with the government of Brazil. He purchased 2.5 million acres called Boa Vista in the attempt to make a rubber plantation colony and cut the cost of tire manufacturing by a significant factor. Here's the deal about the Amazon. It's unforgiving. By a lot. First of all, Ford had decided he wanted to govern the colony like a regular 9-to-5 job. That didn't go over well with the locals. They were used to working according to their culture by working in the mornings and the evenings. When they were mandated to work during the hottest times of the day, you were dealing with a clash of cultures. Also, Ford kept the colony dry. And of course, there was an island of misbehavior not far away to escape from the normalcy of working during the day. The land was hilly and rocky, and to top it off, none of Ford's engineers were qualified in proper rubber tree cultivation. The big issue with this? They planted the trees in neat crop rows up and down a clearing, but because of a native fungal blight, this prevented Ford from being able to harvest those trees, and that's the thing. While the rubber tree is native to South America, so is the blight. The successful rubber trees were those that grew by themselves in their own patch of the Amazon. The only successful rubber tree plantations that have ever been founded are in Southeast Asia and Africa. The reason being the blight was not able to make the journey. After numerous revolts by the workers and absolute zero production of rubber from the colony, Ford eventually pulled out. All the workers left. Many Americans had homes that were in the colony style that were completely abandoned and still furnished. It didn't help by the time the colony was abandoned, synthetic rubber was the main source of rubber through the petroleum sources now. As of today, you can still make your way through the Tapajos River into the land where Fordlandia stands. The old colony homes are still there, dominated by a 150-foot water tower with a chipped but still abundantly familiar logo of the Ford Motor Company. I'm not going to go into a diatribe about how the Amazon is this magical place that is filled with wonderful medicines and solutions to all of society's problems. Most films from the 80s tried doing that. In fact, the Amazon is a rich and dangerous place. Hundreds die of exposure there every year. It's home to one of the hemorrhagic viruses named Lissa. Think of it as the lesser-known sister to Ebola. And its native plant is responsible for the destruction and death of millions of lives over the course of the last 100 years. But at least we can get our sweet Coca-Cola. Yup, it's not widely known or discussed nowadays, but Coca-Cola the drink, the soda, has its origins in the Amazon. Its name is derived of the two main plants it is harvested from, the cola nuts that provide the caffeine, and the coca leaves that used to give it a little kick. It was originally meant to be a patented medicine and was invented in the late 1800s. This was back when carbonated water was thought to be a health drink and cocaine was sold on street corners as a cure-all. Sure, it treated the symptoms. Cocaine would do that, but it of course didn't cure the actual disease. It just made the patient feel really, really well. Oh, and don't do drugs. This isn't a PSA for cocaine. This is meant to show the mismanagement of cure-alls in the absence of a governing body like the FDA. You can still see those kinds of problems today, what with the ginkgo biloba or the daily multivitamins that are being pawned off at the grocery store shelves. Most of those don't have any FDA regulation, and I have it on good authority that most American adults suffer from vitamin D and B12 deficiencies. Those multivitamins, they don't come anywhere close to helping you with those deficiencies. So back to cocaine. The inventor, John Pemberton, first served Coca-Cola as a cure-all, of course, in Atlanta, Georgia. It was also used as a substitute for alcohol when Fulton County passed prohibition regulations. So yeah, going from booze to cocaine extract makes sense, right? There are different iterations of what would eventually become the Coca-Cola Company. But by 1903, Congress advised the company it needed to figure out an alternative to its coca plant ingredient. In 1904, Coca-Cola started using spent coca leaves, with the cocaine taken out but the flavor still present. To this day, the Stepan Company in Maywood, New Jersey, is the only company authorized by the federal government to import and process the coca plant. They are the ones that produce the coca flavoring from the soft drink company, and in turn produce the cocaine extract for medical grade purposes. So even now, 130 some odd years after it was touted as a cure-all, Coca-Cola does in fact contribute to the medical industry. Just for the taste of it, indeed. Now, Ford and Coke, roughly dependent on ingredients harvested from the Amazon, essentially grew up together. Never true competitors, the companies used each other as resources in spreading their products. Ford trucks were used by Coke to distribute their syrups across the country. Both companies by the 1930s were American staples of iconic status. Even now, Ford partnered with Coke to use their plant bottle technology to make the fabric interior of the Ford Fusion Energy, a plug-in hybrid. Now, I'd like to think that there was this one day a perfect confluence occurred. Picture a bright and warm summer day, driving along Route 66. The weather is warm but not too hot so as to prevent you from opening the windows, allowing the wind to whip in your hair. You're driving your Ford F-150, the most popular brand of truck sold in the world. Maybe you have some friends in the cab as well, and laughing as you all decide how to end your road trip. Just as one of your friends reaches for a cold Coke product, Neil Diamond's voice comes over the radio, telling you to sit back, have a Coke, and relax.
Sit back, have a Coke and relax. Sit back, have a Coke and relax, babe. Things go better when you go better. Well, I feel better with Coke.
The great Neil Diamond digs Coke after Coke.
Thank you for listening. Entwined is a podcast that releases every other week and is written, recorded, and produced by P.S. McKay and Elliot Gladstone. This episode was written by P.S. McKay. Please tune in next time to see what Elliot Gladstone has in store for us. For more information about the show and the authors, please check out entwinedpodcast.com or visit our Twitter page @entwinedpodcast.